Porter Robinson's new album, Nurture, just came out today, and I'm going to cut to the chase. It's really, really good. I would be lying if I said that I wasn't completely hype for this thing ever since it was first announced. I'd be lying if I said that, admittedly, the bar was set really high for me. And the only reason that it was set so high was because once the album was announced and Porter dropped the first few singles, being Get Your Wish, Something Comforting, and Mirror, I was immediately blown away. And in my opinion, just from hearing those first few songs, had already determined for myself that they are some of the best work that Porter has ever put out. And it's interesting to think about the trajectory of Porter's soundscape, going all the way back to the Spitfire days, Language, going into Worlds, which became like the career-defining body of work for Porter, and then going into Shelter, collaborating with Madeon and touring their music together. Nurture really distinguishes itself from everything else because I don't want to use the word departure from Porter's earlier music, but really I would describe Nurture as an elevation in Porter's music, because fundamentally what makes it stand out the most is that Porter has really emerged into his own, not just as an EDM artist, but more significantly, a singer-songwriter. For the first time ever, the majority of the album is dominated by lyrically charged tracks that Porter has written himself, that he sings himself. For the first time, we are really seeing that Porter has so much to say as an individual through the lens of his art. And at its core, Nurture touches on themes of reclaiming your self-confidence and loving yourself, overcoming these voices of doubt and insecurity, and overcoming odds that you've created in your own head because of one reason or another. It's been 7 years since we had a new body of work from Porter. His last album, Worlds, came out in 2014. And there was really no telling when we were going to get something new, especially after the release of Shelter. But that wait, that 7-year downtime of reflection and soul searching absolutely shows when you go through the whole album. It shows that in that period of absence, Porter struggled with so much as an artist, doubting his own ability, his viability, his talent. He's been very vocal in a series of interviews and articles that have come out about the toll that it all took on him, and at one point fearing that he was never going to make music ever again. I feel like with the success of Worlds, it became a bar that Porter at one point saw that he had no way of hopping over. And with that said, I am just very, very pleased to see that Nurture far and away distinguishes itself from everything else in the best way possible. And with that said, comparing Worlds and Nurture is kind of like apples and oranges. There's a lot of overlapping themes, you know, the electronic music is still there, but as far as sound design and production goes, we see something really different with Nurture versus Worlds. You know, Worlds, like its namesake, consists of a series of tracks that are all pretty self-contained with their own sense of identity, and you really feel like you're kind of warping around in all these different planets and worlds, literally. Nurture has a much more focused tone that is consistent throughout the whole album. I think a really good descriptor word for Nurture is voice. In terms of sound, the whole tone of the album is bright and plucky, accented with piano pieces throughout the entire album. Sometimes there's orchestral themes with strings that really add flavor to the mix. And all the while, it stays really grounded in Porter's electronic roots. And I was surprised at first, going through the album, that there seems to be a lot less more EDM staples in the sound mixing. a lot of these songs aren't very bassy. You know, there's no 808s that are rupturing your headphones as you listen. Everything is really lofty by choice. You can really hear the intention behind every sound decision. There's all kinds of breathy, hissing kind of spaces between the plucking keys or strings. There's all kinds of blips and whizzes and whirs. There's a lot to discover the more you listen, I find. There's so much more active listening that goes into Nurture, where I feel as with Worlds, depending on the track that you were listening to, I feel like served better as sort of a backdrop to whatever you were doing. And that's another thing that I want to touch on. I think the biggest difference between Worlds and Nurture is that Worlds really embraces a theme of escapism, but Nurture, I think, demands you to be more present when you're listening to it. And that is absolutely reinforced when you actually get into the subject matter of the songs. We start with a really nice, quick prologue opening track featuring piano, and honestly, it reminded me a lot of Undertale. It has a very bright, optimistic, sentimental kind of feeling that reminds me a lot about Undertale. And then we go straight into the first full track of the album, Look at the Sky, which is, I think, just an anthem about looking back and how you realize that something about you changed, but you want to keep moving ahead and realizing that even though things are different now, you're still here and the future is wide open, and that's something that we can't ever forget. Musician stands out on the album as probably the most pop-centric track on the album. It's very catchy, but all the while still aligns itself with the rest of the identity of the album, being very whimsical. And Porter talks about why he does all of this in the first place. There's a lot that goes into making music, and it's always a toss-up about how successful you may end up being, who's going to hear you, who can identify with it. But it's all about chasing this feeling that Porter realized a long time ago, seized, and then just wants to hang on for as long as he can because it's his true love in life. Mirror is one of my favorite tracks on the album, and I think one of my favorite Porter Robinson songs of all time. It really dives into the theme of how our lowest points are often created by ourselves when we allow ourselves to get into our own head, and it doesn't matter what other people are saying to us that can get us down, because chances are, if we're already so hard on ourselves, like Porter has made it very clear, we're going to be 10 times as hard on ourselves. And so the song Mirror is about those conversations that we have with ourselves when we're looking at ourselves in the mirror, and knowing what we want for ourselves, knowing that we really do have our best interests at heart, and it's up to us to determine what all of that is worth to us. If we want to get better, we're going to find a way to do it. There's another song called Mother, which is a very heartfelt display of gratitude to Porter's mother, and I think just mother figures everywhere that we, the audience, can project onto, about how just having someone in your life, a family member, love you so completely, know you so completely, unconditionally, and that will be there by your side for the rest of your life, and just how indestructible that can be. Each lyrical track on the album is so powerful, with an equally powerful message behind it, that there's so much to absorb after you listen to it. And the whole album as a piece has a sweeping landscape to navigate with all these different themes. And I think the flow of the whole album as you listen to it is supplemented by these instrumental tracks that kind of break up each theme that you explore. Dull Scythe, Wind Tempos is a really great track that it's kind of hard to predict where that song is going to go. And I was at first afraid that it was going to be arbitrarily split up into two different tracks leading into musician that comes right after it. Too often do I see on albums a lot of songs that have intended like prologue sections to them, but then the artist decides to split that song off and create it as its own track, and it ends up being something that's like 40 seconds long. I'm looking at you, Gorillaz. When you announced Humans, they were like, oh, you know, it's a 19-track album, and like 5 of those tracks are like less than 40 seconds long. So I was really happy to see that there was nothing like that on this album except the opening track, Lifelike, which was just a short introductory piano piece, which was perfect. I love things like that. And despite its length, Lifelike comes full circle as being an even more powerful track in retrospect when we finally reach the end of the album and get to a song that I can only talk so briefly about because I really don't want to spoil it, but it's a song called Trying to Feel Alive. To me, these 2 tracks serve as perfect bookends to the whole album. And in conclusion, there is just so much to explore with Nurture. I'm very, very happy to say that there's 14 tracks and 13 of those tracks are full-length songs, and the first one is just a brief introductory track. But we're sitting at 59 minutes of new music from Porter Robinson, and I just can't recommend it enough. It's bright and optimistic and plucky, lofty, whimsical. Seriously, I think the best listening experience that you can have with this album is by going outside, walking around in a park, taking your whole day in and just being present. I went on a 5-mile walk today and listened to the album twice, and I walked through parks, farmland, nature preserves, under a big bright blue sky, feeling the wind on my face, the mist of sprinklers, and the smell of grass. Again, I think Worlds offered a huge sense of escapism, and Nurture so desperately wants you to feel as present as you can with yourself and with the world around you. Nurture says that you don't need to escape to a fantasy land to discover the beauty that is all around you. Life happens wherever you are, and it took Porter 7 years after Worlds to determine what life meant to him as a musician and as an individual going forward. And every track on Nurture is an anthem of him knowing what it's all about and what we can take from it. So I really hope that you guys listen to Nurture. I'm not gonna do like a rating system. This isn't an album review, it's more like a discussion. But if I had to give Nurture some kind of score, I would give it 1 meadow of wildflowers. That's the rating I give Nurture. Go listen to it.